Remember, you can save it. Share it to your page. It should be up now. I always think it's fun to sit here and record myself talking to myself for a second because people don't realize that y'all are there listening to me. Okay. Sharing it to my page. So over the past week, everybody's been talking about the 100-year anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre, during which a mob of whites went in and murdered and destroyed a thriving Black community. And although it's been the conversation for the past week, it's been something for many years that I've thought about for my own self, because my family was from Oklahoma, and they lived not that far from where Black Wall Street was. And so I do think about that a lot. And as I think about that situation, and I think about overall the idea of trauma, and we've been having multiple conversations about trauma within our community and the impact that it's had on our people, I realized that I don't think we have a single definition, a working definition of what trauma is. So for myself, when I think about trauma, I think about anything that's a threat to the safety and security of myself, my family, and my community. And so if you think about all the experiences, essentially, as people of African descent that we've had since our ancestors showed up on these shores, those have been traumatic experiences. And so then I start to think about all the ways that those experiences get documented, and through movies or videos or books or just other kinds of media. And for a long time, I would watch different movies that would kind of show our different experiences, and I would be excited about those. And then a series of movies started to come out, and I wasn't as excited about those movies any longer. And I started to use this term and label those movies Black trauma porn. And I thought I was unique. And then I had to realize, hey, Sister Dawn, I see you down there in Guyana. Welcome. I started to realize that as I was using that term Black trauma porn, when I looked it up, I saw that other people were using that term. And so it's like our kind of collective consciousness realized that there's something going on here. While that there are movies and books that tell our story in a way that describes the trauma, but then also is helpful, there are also things that I've seen that I realize aren't helpful, that it's salacious and it's problematic. And I realize that it's designed for someone else's entertainment, not the entertainment or healing of the Black community. And that it's also designed to line somebody else's pockets with money. And so that's a conversation that I wanted to have, looking at this concept of Black trauma porn and how does it impact our community, and then who's profiting off of Black trauma porn. So in order for us to do that, we haven't done it in 2 months, but I am happy to invite my colleagues. So first, I want to bring back our colleague. This is anthropologist, Professor Waithe, and she is going to talk everything in terms of culture, anthropology, but then also, y'all, look at her hair. She's also the owner of Grand Tressa Hair Products. So thank you, Dr. Waithe, for coming.
It's so great to be here. Thank you.
And then next is Professor Corrie Claiborne. She is an associate professor of literature at Morehouse College. Thank you, Dr. Claiborne, for showing up.
Thank you.
And then also my colleague, and I always tease her because, well, you know what I'm going to say, you got 50 million different names. Reverend Estee Dillard. She is a queer sexologist. She is a reverend, and she is also a priestess of Olokun. I'm going to say that right, because last time I said that she was a priestess of Maori. So true. Hey, sis, how you doing? And then my other colleague, Dr. Kenja McCray, she's a historian, and she always reminds us, again, that we don't know anything about history because we have not looked at primary resources. So she always gets us straight in terms of history. And we're going to do this talk. We normally have our colleague that is here, our colleague Thandisizwe Chimurenga. She's not here with us, but she is here with us in spirit. I'm sure that she is listening. And so we're going to partly dedicate this to her, but then also partly dedicate this to our ancestors that came before us that were murdered, not just in the Tulsa Massacre, but all the massacres that have happened since our ancestors have showed up on these lands. We also want to dedicate this to the First Nations people whose land has been stolen that we sit upon now, and to recognize that in the telling of our stories, while that is important, there's a way that our stories need to be told that still protects our integrity, that protects the integrity of the ancestors, that protects the integrity of the community, and not simply be entertainment for someone else's profit. So that being said, Professor Waithe, I'm gonna let you start us out.
Okay, all right, thank you so much. So when we talk about porn, what is porn exactly? So when you break down the word porn, some of it comes from Greek porno, which means, prostitute. The other part means, graphy, which is to write. So the earliest use of the term means to write about harlots, later on to write about prostitutes, right? Really? Then that term, to write about prostitutes. So it evolved eventually to include other forms of media, which included, not only just writing about prostitutes or, because, no respectable woman would be, doing those types of things that they wrote about or doing those types of things that they portrayed in the pictures. So as it evolved to include media, just not writing, but also photographs, and then later media, and then later Instagram and all that other type of stuff. So when we think about porn, it is mediated images that is put out there to give pleasure. And when we think about pleasure, we don't need to think about it necessarily in a sexual sense, but in a way that people get or derive gratification from mediated images, right? Mm-hmm. So when we talk about Black trauma porn, because porn has been used now to talk about a whole slew of things. For example, you have wealth porn. And one of the reasons why they said the 50 Shades of Grey was so popular, because it was wealth porn. It used gratuitous images and descriptions of all the opulence that the characters had. So it wasn't so much about that, but creating a desire to be on a yacht, to have someone to, have, like, I know one person just critiqued about how they talked about the thread counts on the sheets, just like certain detail. So we talk about Black trauma porn, we're talking about the pain and the trauma of African people that is put on display, the excessive pain and trauma for African people. And that the gaze of that is not for African people as opposed to other people. So when we look at Black trauma porn, you have anthropologists like Clifford Geertz, you have, sociologists like Foucault, who said that we can read these images like a text, right? So it's not just pictures that we do, but we can consume and we can read and break down these images. And there's this one guy, his name was Douglas Kilner, and he did a whole book called Mediated Culture, right? And in Mediated Culture, it breaks down the ideology, it breaks down the text and the audience and how we break down these images to see what they're really meaning. So when we talk about that, we have three areas of that. We have dominant, negotiated, and oppositional responses to these images that we see, right? So if we look at something and we say, oh, okay, so I saw Antebellum, and Antebellum is billed as revenge porn, but it's not really, like Black fantasy revenge porn, but it's not really that, because we can look at it and see that the dominant images that we take isn't really going against the mainstream. It's not going against the system. In some ways, it reinforces it. So when you read those cultures, you have to take into account, okay, is this a message from the dominant culture? Is this something that I have to struggle with? Or is it something that I resist, right? And when we talk about resistance, there are three different types of resistance. You have directional, reactionary, and arbitrary. And I think this is really important because this is going to lead us into what we're talking about in terms of Tulsa in terms of Watchmen, in terms of other things. Because when you look at, the resistance, the directional resistance, when you're reading a text or the characters are portraying something on film, is that they're directing their anger to the people that it needs to be directed to, right? To the right people.
In the film that they would be
directing. Right. So when you look at the characters and you look at the things that they're doing, for instance, in Lovecraft, when they were in Tulsa, the anger was justified because they not only were directing it not necessarily at specific European people, but the system that started that as a whole, right? So it was directional. Or you have reactionary, opposition to it, which you just see something and you have a reaction, which is, we look at Them, which is a bad takeoff of Lovecraft Country. You can see that it's more reactionary because you look at it and you say, oh my God, that's so horrible. White people are so horrible, but you don't move past that, right? And then you have, like arbitrary, where you was like, I might be mad at white people. I might be mad at the system, right? In those terms of resistance. So when we look at Black trauma porn, right? Or when we look at Black media, we need to see how that media is being read. Is it something that reinforces the dominant ideology? Is it something that when we look at, we have to negotiate who we are when we see it? Is it something that, is saying, okay, this is going against the mainstream. This is something that's opposing European culture that's going to help us grow and rise as a people to take it to the next step. And I think when you look at it and when you read it in that form, you'll be able to distinguish Black trauma porn from, other film that's really talking about and dealing with our pain as a people, like, for instance, Do the Right Thing or Get Out, or Us as a, for that matter, that is dealing with who we are. So that's how we need to read it.
So it's interesting that you say that, because I'm thinking about Lovecraft Country, which we talked about before. And by the way, let me just acknowledge, so we got folks from around the world, y'all. We got our folks from Kenya. Hi, John. In Kenya, they're like saying hello. So, hey. So I remember because Sister Thandisizwe from in California, she said hey too. So I remember her calling me and telling me that I had to look at Lovecraft Country, and I was like, and the first thing I did is I labeled it as Black trauma porn. And I did that first episode, and you remember the scene. So this is a spoiler if you haven't seen it already, so turn off right now. In that first episode, when they're all in the woods, and there's a scene with these white racists are holding the guns to them, and you thinking like, oh God, we've seen this before. And then those monsters come out and take off their heads, and I was like, whoa! And that was like this relief, because it wasn't the same thing. I didn't expect that at all. And even I think, I don't know if it was episode 7 or whatever the episode is, when they're trying to do the spell, where I forget the main character, the guy and his dad are trying to do the spell together, and they think it doesn't work, and the police are trying to shoot them, and then all of a sudden they realize that the spell works. And to me, what I realized in those moments is that wasn't designed. That is not the story that normally that we see. It was something totally different that allowed us to have some sense of, I feel relief from that.
Right. Because I think it was so well written, because it's not revenge porn like Them and Antebellum try to build themselves up. It was a whole context of a struggle where it went deeper in terms of the implications had broader meaning for African people as a whole, right? It had to deal with, we can read that about Black people's power, we can African people's power, African people's strength, and tapping into that hidden strength that we have to overcome these injustices, right? So that's what makes it so different from these other two.
So, well, I'm going to disagree because I think Lovecraft is trauma porn. However, it is trauma porn with Black women directors, Black actors, Black creatives who added in such like touch points of Black culture that we loved and like saw ourselves reflected back, right? It did not feel like it was exploitation, which if for me, if you watch something like Django, feels like
terrible,
right? It doesn't feel like that. But like I said, I think that even this kind of the main kind of idea where like Ruby, the sort of Black darker sister, would have the desire to turn white. And literally they would have in the series where this woman turns herself inside out in the most bloody way possible in order to be white, live out this desire, have a white lover, etc. That's still violence, right? That is still, you cannot tell me that a Black person would have written that storyline because A, a Black person did it, and B, even if you clean it up, right? You make Ruby great. The actress who played her was great. I mean, I enjoyed the storyline, but I was like, how does that make me feel about Black people? Of course, I know segregation exists. They weren't able to work in these places, but I was like, you had to have that woman literally turn herself inside out and experience whiteness for her to have any kind of happiness, to have her be with a white lover, to have any kind of happiness. And those are those kind of things that while you might even be enjoying it, it's subtly, I think, reinforcing these pornographic images. And I mean porno in the way you were talking about images of Black people that are still damaging.
I have nothing to say. So you could break that. That's an excellent point, Corrie. Question. Okay, so this is a random kind of technical stuff. I was going to text you, but then I'm not going to do that. So your head is kind of behind the. So go this way. Yeah, perfect. Stay right there.
Wait a minute.
So I know H.P. Lovecraft didn't write Lovecraft Country. It's the other guy.
No, it's not.
Okay.
Yeah. So a white man wrote the.
He wrote that part where she, because I didn't read the book.
Yes. And so there are a lot of things that the Black creatives changed, right? They did change from not Lovecraft, but from Lovecraft Country, which is Matt Ruff's book. And like I said, I thought it was interesting that a white man will write a book about like magic and family lineage, et cetera, and then sort of go tripping through all of these traumatic events that happened to Black people. Like that was Matt Ruff's desire. However, what I think the Black directors, writers, all these people brought to it is they brought specificity that could only have meaning to us. So for example, in the Tulsa, I think that was episode 9, Lottie, I think, the main character, walking through the fire, clutching like that book at the, that the ancestor gives her. And there's that whole Sonia Sanchez poem, right? That's in the back. You got to catch that fire. Don't let that fire die, right? Which is a poem. If you could go YouTube it, just Catch the Fire, Sonia Sanchez, where she is talking about how we can't let the fire of sort of Black resistance die. That's what the poem is about, right? Like, think about all these things. Like, think about these people who sat there. She's like, and Martin and Malcolm and all these other people. If you don't catch that fire. And so literally that moment when she's walking out that fire with that book, I was like, oh, she is bringing every ancestor with her. That is not in Matt Ruff's book. That is not there. So it is understandable why we would get that and be like, oh, this is so empowering. But like I said, the intention of that is like, let's look at everything over history where Black people have been subjected. Like, so the Bobo, or who is like the Emmett Till character who is killed and they go to his funeral in Chicago. Right. Like that is not necessarily part of the, part of the story, right? Like, so they go from sundown towns, they go to Emmett Till, they go to this girl wanting to be white so she could work at a department store. They go through all of these different elements of subjugation. And for him, it's just saying, well, wouldn't it be cool if all the time where these people are getting hurt, they had this kind of magical knowledge in the background, right? And to us, that isn't about us getting free, right? And we did have magical knowledge. It wasn't even was this a question mark, right?
Right.
It is about even sort of, if you want to tell the story of Tulsa, obviously tell it. But I think this kind of suggestion at the end that it's necessary for him to go through all of this because he wants to write a story about magic, I think is a really interesting thing for us.
So right. This is interesting, and let me bring Dr. McCray into this. I want to look at Lovecraft Country and then also Django, because Jamila, I think we saw Django together. I don't remember. I was with some. It was two couples. We was on a couples date. I thought it was you, and I remember walking out of that movie when we got to the part where the fight, when the two enslaved men were forced to fight to the death. And I was just like, I'm done. And I could tell, I mean, Quentin Tarantino loves showing those images of Black people where there's some traumatic, hellacious, horrible thing, particularly of Black men. He loves that.
You can feel that, like the joy he has in it. I mean, absolutely. The joy of saying the word nigga, right? Like for everybody to say it. Like he literally loves it.
There is glee, you can tell in the writing of and presenting that. And I'm wondering your commentary on both of those when you think back on Django and then Lovecraft Country from a historical perspective. What would be your thoughts?
Well, I thought Django was, I think part of the conversation that's missing is the genre of the film. So the genre of the film or the genre of the television show does matter in terms of what we'll get in the telling of the story. So Django was done in a sort of spaghetti Western fashion, and the violence was very forward. So I think we need to really think about unpacking what it means to situate African and African descended people in certain genres of film where the violence is forward. You know, the violence is very much baked into the telling of this particular type of story, and then what the result will be. And, you know, I think it's no secret. If you've seen me before on one of these talks, then you know I'm very much into the Black arts movement. And I still really, really think that some of the parameters that they've given us in terms of defining the Black aesthetic are important when we're evaluating these films. So, you know, I always say, is it functional? Is it committed or committing? You know, is it committed to telling the story of our struggle? Does it commit people to telling our struggle? And does it emanate from our community? And I think that's one of the questions you're raising. Okay, so what? This is a spaghetti Western, but this is Quentin Tarantino's story, telling of this particular story. So then in the end, what is the point of this violence? But the conversations around Django, I think, I don't think that they centered on a kind of consuming violence against Black lives, against Black bodies, just for the sake of consuming violence against Black lives and Black bodies. I think one of the major outcomes in terms of conversations around Django was that opening up conversations about African Americans who were enslaved fighting back, resistance. So we were able to have a series of deep conversations around how Django showed Black resistance. So it didn't just show the evisceration of, you know, Black bodies and destruction of Black bodies, but it situated the story of Black resistance in this spaghetti Western genre. So I think when we have conversations about what's happening on the screen, in a particular fictional account of or historical fictional account of something that happened, it's important for us to talk about the genre, talk about some of the outcomes, and talk about how this art opens up larger conversations for us. So, I mean, I think in a way, I do appreciate you bringing up the trauma porn issue for me, because being a historian, a person who sat in the library and read like the works progress administrative narratives that were collected, the last living people who experienced chattel enslavement in the United States, I kind of learned to live with a kind of trauma, right? Narratives of trauma around Black history, around African American history. So my tolerance for it was high, and I don't think always in a good way. So I would suffer through these films and call you and say, hey, can I have some free psychological help after watching? And, you know, bringing up the whole thing of trauma porn really, really gave me permission to say, I'm not watching that. So there are a lot of things on my list, a lot of things you all are talking about, like Antebellum, when a lot of people came back and said, oh my gosh, the violence against Black lives, the violence against Black bodies, I don't do it. Mm-mm. I don't put myself through that. But I, you know, I totally understand. And I think people's threshold for, you know, what's too much violence, what's too much exploitation, you know, what feels like exploitation, let me say it like that, is different. And I just think that I liked Lovecraft Country because I think it opened up really, really good conversations about things that happened in the African American past, and about how we envision our future, right? And I enjoyed Django, and even though I didn't like everything, I don't like Quentin Tarantino's movies, and not just about, you know, Black people, you know, like the way the level of violence, gratuitous violence, I'm not really into that. But in terms of the genre, I understand, like, what do we do? Do we advocate or lobby against putting centering African descended people's stories in certain genres because they're violence forward, you know, because they're salacious? I don't know. That's a slippery slope in a certain way.
So, and I want to, Estee, I'm going to bring you in next. I think that we have to have a particular way that we think about these things. I think what you said in terms of the Black Arts Movement and being able to measure like how the impact on the community, I think is important. I know for First Nations people in Canada and in Australia, they actually have boards. So even if you want to do research on First Nations people, you know, present that research to the board. And I forget what they're called. Somebody, if you guys are listening and you know the name of it, then help me with that. So you would actually submit your research or ideas to that particular board and to get feedback. And I think that we need to begin to think about that for ourselves. And so I want to kind of jump to you, Estee, and talk a little bit about the new series that I was just so excited about, which is High on the Hog. And when we think about High on the Hog, I think it's really interesting because each episode, so there's 4 episodes, and it's talking about the culinary history of America. And in each one of those episodes, they are talking about trauma. So they start in Benin and they talk about enslavement. And I think it's very beautifully done, but you can tell that it's done, except for one part that I'll get to later, but you can tell that it is written by Black people, it is presented for Black people, and it is about the love of our community. And so, Estee, I'm just wondering your thoughts about having watched High on the Hog.
Yeah, so I want to take a step back first and just add a nuance to our lens, which is what I'm always doing in our group, right? Mm-hmm. But when we're thinking about Black trauma porn, I just want to make sure that we're also thinking about the variances in Black life. So there are also ways that movies, films, short series, stories that we center in our own culture are Black trauma porn for queer folks, are Black trauma porn for women, ways that we normalize rape culture, and make Black trauma porn out of that. So I just wanted to name that part too, because I think that's really important, that there can be components of things that we center where the storytelling itself may have been about elevating Black life and centering Black pleasure and Black joy, but because we have not communally done work around what spiritual trauma looks like, how it impacts us, it's been ingrained into some of these other narratives. So things come to mind like, The Color Purple or What's Love Got to Do with It, which are movies that I love that are very much a part of, those kinds of classic experiences. but for those of us that live in different variances of Black life, it's Black trauma porn for us as well. So I wanted to name that. I also loved, my partner made me cut High Off the Hog on because I kept crying, boohoo, nasty crying.
I cried on all 4 episodes. That's, yeah. I cried.
Like after we got through episode 2, she was like, I think you need a break. I had to be like, no, it's because it was so rich. It was so deeply invigorating to my spirit. And at the same time, it raises a truth within us, an embodied truth. There was a way that watching that man walk that road in that red clay as a girl from Georgia who has red clay outside of my childhood home right now that I can go reach and put my hands on. Yes. And to be able to see these very clear parallels, even things like watching them eat the food when they were eating the fried fish and they're saying, oh, you know, well, this is this vegetable and this is this stuff, but it looked like mullet and sweet potatoes that my godmama make on Jeffersonville Road in Macon, Georgia, you know, and thinking about how we have come here and recreated our realities and brought our spiritual technologies and our genius and taken what we have amidst horror, amidst horror. It may be also want to fight some white folks, but that's every day. But I think that what's very critical about what happens with High on the Hog is that it's intentional that they center telling the story from a place of balance. And I really think that's all it requires to be able to be in conversation with our narratives differently. I consider myself an ancestral storyteller, and that's because whether it's through spiritual means or whether it's through literature or whether it's through storytelling or whether it's through keeping our traditions, there are all kinds of ways that we engage with our ancestors because we hold their energy and their ashe in our bodies, right? And so there is horror there. There is pain there. And it doesn't take much to wake it up because it is so raw to us still. And we can tell that part and recognize the beauty and the genius at the same time. And I don't know that there's a lot that's being done as well balanced as High on the Hog is.
Yeah, I mean, that it was beautiful. So I see Dawn was asking, I was trying to ask her which one. Dawn was asking for which movie. Can we name the movie? So I'm not sure, Dawn, if you were referring to High on the Hog or what else did we said a bunch of stuff. We said Django,
Antebellum.
What was the other one, Corrie?
Antebellum, maybe?
Maybe Antebellum. Yeah, we said a number of them. I'll try to put them in the chat, Don. I see Mel Christopher Young. He said, Christopher said, she said, Django. Okay, all the movies. Mel Christopher was talking about the uncle, and I think that was the second episode, losing his land, and just him crying about that. I mean, that was a lot. Like when I saw each episode, the only issue, and I'm wondering your thoughts about this, the only issue that I had with the entire series is when they were in Benin, then that one part when he's talking about the transatlantic trade in human beings, and the only thing that he says about it is they got the shot of the brother from Benin, and he was talking about like how we did this and we enslaved our people. And I said, see, there you go. You can see that that corporate oppression money, because that's this new narrative now of talking about this over and over again from that perspective of like, we did this, we enslaved ourselves. And I was talking to Kenja about that, and I said, no. See, what they're not talking about, because they talked about the Dahomey Empire, and when you talk about the Dahomey Empire and the Yoruba Empire, those are two enemies. We hear over here, because all of us have brown skin and we say we're all the same people. They were enemies at war with each other. They were not enslaving their own people. They are at war and they are capturing their enemies and selling their enemies, which is a total different thing to talk about. And so that's the only thing, that's the only critique that I would have, where I was like,
I want to add this though in Dr. Ifetayo is that, but what he also did say is, but we didn't know what slavery was. He said that part too. So I think for that helped frame, it didn't land the same way for me hearing that statement too, because I think that's also really critical, which is why we have to have this balance. Because I think about movies like 12 Years a Slave. I think that's a classic movie that folks need to watch, because there's some accuracy in the horror and the pain of it, where the objective is not pleasure from it, where the objective is reflecting that truth of our ancestors' experience. But I think it's important also, just like we're talking about two different very well established folks who are at war with each other, between the Dahomey and the Yoruba. Also, there's no concept of what the Dutch and the Portuguese and the French and the Spanish and the English were doing, and the Americans, right? There's no concept of slavery and chattel slavery, and that doesn't exist before the way it was created by Europeans.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. I feel that it is one of the things, I think, and when we're talking about trauma porn and sort of negative images and all of that, is that, you know, Black people are good and bad. We're complex. We are going to be the villain in some stories and the heroes in others. And one of the things I think we really have to wrestle with what that means, right? Like what that means, because I remember getting in this whole Twitter fight, why I had too much time, about Harriet, because and a lot of it, because Harriet was illiterate and did not write her own story, we don't know about. We just know that she got from here to here, you know, she might have had people help her here. But they were going off about one of the fictional characters, and every single movie about a person has fictional characters in it. I don't care what movie it is, they did. But in this one of the fictional characters, the made-up characters, was a Black man who was a bounty hunter, right? And so they were like, this is just so made up. No Black man's gonna be a bounty hunter and go after slaves. I was like, literally they were, right? Yeah. Like you can read, you know, the slave advertisements, and they would say, okay, if you bring back this enslaved person back to their owner, the reward is $5 for a white man, and it's $1 for a Black man. They understand that Black people, you know, did, in fact, work in the slave system in a way that was not helpful to Black people. Every single slave rebellion was put down by another Black man. Every single one. They ratted every single one out. They made sure
it wasn't the sisters. You gotta say that. It wasn't the sisters.
Wasn't the sisters. I do. When Black women, but you go ask Denmark Vesey, when he was planning his rebellion, who told his white master that they were going to have a rebellion and still stayed enslaved. He ratted everybody out so he could still stay owned by a white man, which makes it even ridiculous. So you have to deal with that literally happened. We do have some Black people, and of course in Africa it is different. They did not think that slavery meant forever. They did not think it was the horror of which it was. But there was also this sense that, you know, it was tribal. It was like, we are worried about us, right? Like you said, the Yoruba were not worried. And the Congo, all of slavery, you know, sort of started because those people could not, the different tribes could not, the different nation states couldn't get together. So I think that there are, like I said, this kind of desire to have things that are pleasing, desire to have history that is only great. And I think that this leads us to not want to deal with stories that are about slavery that are necessary, I think. Stories that do tell, you know, things where, you know, whatever it's still a Black story, but it's not a nice story. You know, people don't get rich in the end.
And I'm not necessarily saying that it has to be a story where it is imbalanced or those things aren't told. But I always pay attention, just like Henry Louis Gates and that little so-called history of Africa he did that, you know, that can kick rocks. There's constantly this telling of it when we want to tell, when we talk about enslavement now, what the talking about it is we enslaved each other. That is the talking about it. That is the primary point. And so, I mean, part of what ends up happening is sometimes people get mad at me on Twitter because they'll talk about the Dahomey warrior women and they praise them and they put them up and they're like, oh, that's so wonderful and everything. And I'm like, if y'all just crack open one book, you ain't got to do two. You can get a small book. If you read Barracoon, Kojo Lewis was the reason that he was captured and his community was decimated is because of the homie Amazon or the homie women warriors that went in and beheaded the people in the community, beheaded the king, captured him, and helped to sell his butt so he could be in the United States. So we don't need to pretend like it wasn't Black women doing it. And we don't need to pretend like it wasn't people of African descent involved in the transatlantic trade of human beings. So I agree with you, Estee, and I agree with you, Corrie, when you're saying that there was a different concept. What was going down in the U.S. was different. And so I do agree with that. I guess my only point is, so if you're going to say that, then if you're going to say 10% of what we did, I need to hear 90%
right.
the other piece of what was happening.
You to go tell the story, tell the whole story, right? You can't just
tell the truth and shame the devil.
Yeah. You can't just come in and like, oh, I'm going to highlight. So yeah, if there was a movie about Black slave catchers, I'd be like, what was this nonsense, right? Not even, can I say that? That didn't even never happen, right? Like that would have never happened. It's just only Black people going around catching other Black people. So that
but I guarantee you, because you done said it, so it's going to get in some producers here and then we'll see some foolishness like that.
It's just going to be a television show to catch a Black, right? Like literally.
That series will be funded for 3 seasons, I guarantee you.
But I also think that's part of the importance of us being able to do this work, right? And the importance of us telling our own stories. That's why we're seeing this difference, is because we're able to take ownership of our stories and we're able to get access in different ways. And so I think that's what's critical. What we have with Lovecraft Country is we've got to be able to tell our own stories, to be invested in this act of storytelling, and to understand the efficacy of what that does for us to be able to reconstruct how these narratives are perpetuated.
Yeah, and I think, Estee, what you said was very important about nuance. So we should be careful, I think, to avoid making sweeping generalizations. And I think being more invested in telling our own stories, we need to make sure that we tell those stories with nuance. So to say that no one ever knew what was going on, in terms of chattel slavery, we could say that about some people, maybe even a lot of people, but we're talking about different peoples over, hundreds of years. And so we have to keep in mind change over time, continuities over time, continuities between cultures, differences in cultures. And it was said that, the West Africans couldn't get together, but we have to keep in mind. So Dr. Ojelade knows I just finished reading Jesse's Homegoing, or listening to it on audiobook. And I just finished doing some light research around Africa Town and Kojo Lewis. So that's on my mind. So I was thinking exactly what you were thinking. Look at Kojo Lewis, listen to or read Barracoon, and you'll get a very strong sense of what was happening between the Oyo Empire, the Yorubas, and the Fon and the Hum. One, thing is that a nuance that we're taking off the table is class, social class within West Africa. So what you'll find is that in the Dahomey, at this point, which is when Kojo Lewis was captured, is 1860, the transatlantic trading in enslaved people's lives is supposed to be over in terms of the United States by decades, right? And but in the newspaper in Alabama, in Mobile and Plateau, Alabama, and Southern Alabama, people are being told that no, the king of Dahomey went back on this. He doesn't want to participate this. He wants to open up this trade and enslaved people's lives, and he wants to make it a royal monopoly. So it's not the ordinary people, the everyday people in Dahomey, the ordinary everyday farm people who are being involved in this. There's a royal monopoly on this trade. And so there are class differences within West Africa, and on top of ethnic differences, national, but we can consider national differences or differences between kingdoms. And as Jesse says, in the homegoing, it's like a pot with a stew. And if the Fon are one group and the Yorubas are one group and the Fanti are one group and the Ashanti are another group, they're all in this pot together, and it's full. But the Europeans come and put the fire under it, and it starts to boil over. So it's not just an internal problem; they're internal issues, but also external factors that contribute to this prolonged this trade, and all that needs to be dealt with. And I agree. What we don't want to do is tell a story like Africans were responsible for their own situation. So that's not what we're trying to say.
Yeah. And I see Mel Christopher made a comment here, just saying that I'm going to actually put it, if I can, because I think this is interesting. It's an interesting point when we're talking about the beginning of this conversation. Yeah, but that's the rough one. In some of these recent films, The Black Trader and Harriet, Queen and Slim, Django, had the character I love to hate. And he's talking about Samuel Jackson's character. I mean, which is real. Like, you think about, I don't even remember Samuel Jackson's character in Django, but I don't remember his name, but I clearly remember him. And I enjoyed seeing that.
What's interesting to me,
Stephen. I remember Stephen, and
Stephen.
Yeah, he was a hot mess. Hot mess.
Yes. So this is one of those things I think becomes interesting, because you have enjoyment in something. It doesn't mean that it's not also problematic, right? Like, you can laugh at,
like Coming to America.
I was always fascinated by the fact my mother used to talk about how the fact she used to love, buckwheat and our gang, and like even the old Amos and Andy, the black and white Amos and Andy, and the Amos and Andy cartoon come out. It was like these horrible stereotypes of black men. But she was like, you would be laughing at because you knew that wasn't real black people, right? Like, and I think one of the things that they're always asking Samuel Jackson how he could play these like horrible stereotypic characters, because it was like Black Snake Moan. I don't know if you saw that. Let me think what else he was in. Some other kind of just crazy kind of stuff.
Crack addict.
I think he is so clear in his blackness that he was like, I know that this is not us. The reason you can laugh at Amos and Andy is because that is not us, right? Like, you can laugh at Good Times because this might be a stereotype that overall is bad for black people, but that is not me, right? And it's interesting because Samuel Jackson made last year that almost nobody watched, but it's really excellent. It's a 6-part documentary on enslavement.
Yeah.
Where he literally goes with people who dive under the water to find artifacts. He goes and does his DNA and finds out he's from, I want to say, Gabon. He goes back and they make a whole welcome. They name something after him. He goes through the ritual. He picks up all this artifacts, the cane and all this other kind of stuff that you have to join that. And I was saying that this is his understanding. Like, yes, I was Stephen, but I'm trying to make sure people know that that is not who I am, right? I am this person who knows all about my history. I understand the real seriousness of enslavement. And that is my plug that everybody should watch Enslaved.
And, and I agree, but with another character that you would love to hate is Medea, right? So then we would think about, does Tyler Perry understand what he's doing when he's putting forth this image of, the stereotypical image of a Southern grandma. So I have a complex relationship with Medea, as I stated before, because on one hand, I can recognize parts of Medea in my own family. But like you were saying, Corrie, on another level, I don't recognize that at all. I was like, I don't know what that is. So I know that's not me. So I can look at Medea and, just kind of like push it aside. So, there is, I think it's problematic with characters that you love to hate, because it's that, again, it gives that resistance that we were talking about earlier, like those arbitrary reactions, like, do I like it? Do I hate it? I like it today. I hate it tomorrow, whatever. So those are things that, I think is interesting to talk about.
And I think about Spike Lee. Think about how he dragged Django, how he dragged Tyler Perry, like how he said that, like, y'all ain't doing nothing. This ain't historical. But he has his own movies, especially where it comes to women and people, if they're trans or gay or lesbian. She Hate Me is so problematic on so many levels. I don't know if anybody has seen that. But I was like, you sit up here and talk about Tyler Perry can't make a movie. Why are you making this movie, right?
Yeah, yeah, and there's also another love-hate relationship, and you have some people that will argue that in Spike Lee's films that is ultimately a tale of morality and politics. But I do agree that it is problematic because of the way that he treats women. Because how are you going to tell a woman's story if you're a man? I know that may be a little controversial to say that, or, because I can't say what it's like to be a man. I can't. And I say all the time that I think that in terms of conversations about Black women, Black femininity, Black womanhood, those are conversations that need to be guided, directed by African-American women or women of African descent. Sure, men can contribute to the conversation, but they shouldn't direct it or guide it or, orchestrate it. Just like sometimes we can contribute to conversations about Black masculinity, but we shouldn't guide it. You know what I'm saying? So all those things that Spike Lee, he could, in terms of she's got to have it, she hate me. I think he was really trying to direct and create that conversations about African womanhood when he shouldn't have.
And speaking of women, I'm throwing this one out there. We didn't talk about this. Did anybody watch In My Mother's Gardens? What are your thoughts about that?
So I really liked it.
I'm sorry.
Okay, you have to understand where I'm coming from. Like, the first thing that popped up on Netflix for me when they put In Our Mother's Gardens is our one of our advisors from Morris Brown College, Professor Kokava Selassie. I was like, wait, she was in silhouette, and I was like, this sounds just like Dr. Selassie. I'm intrigued. I want to watch this, and it was, and so I watched all the way through, and she was so much herself, and just totally interesting. Much. So I think that alone brought about some enjoyment. Now, you and I have talked about this, Dr. Ojelade, and we agreed that the theme, there was a strong theme of sort of like Brittany Cooper's Beyond Respectability. So the stories tended to exist in the realm about elders in the realm of beyond respectability. Like my grandma when somebody was in the store and this person, we were doing what kids do, and this person slapped us. My grandma came back and broke the window of the store, like stories like that, right? And I know that that's one lens to tell the story of our mothers and grandmothers, our foremothers, but respectability politics the respectability politics that Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham wrote about are very strong among the women in my family. And I don't know how many of their stories would have comported with that beyond respectability model. So let's not throw the respectability politics out of the window. We can interrogate them, but in terms of the lens that we show, to what extent does the beyond respectability model of storytelling lend itself to a kind of trauma porn, so that's all.
Well, I loved it. So, I mean, it's interesting because I don't love Alice Walker, and I know that's like heretical and problematic, because I think she can be problematic. However, I will say about...
Wait, let me ask you something. You don't love her because of her writing or because of her kind of how she moves through the world, or both?
Both.
Okay.
I mean, I love her books, but there are aspects of it that... Well, anyway, I'll circle back around. But and this is the same thing for Jessica B. Harris, who wrote the High on the Hog and sort of did these kind of work. So both In Search of Our Mother's Gardens and High on the Hog are books about the process of recovery and how important that is. To recover these stories and tell those stories. Right? And that is so powerful. And I think the reason why both of these documentaries resonated with people so much, and the fact they're both on Netflix, is because they are doing this work. So you feel so good just in the same way, when you hear about Alice Walker going down to Florida, finding this Black woman who all of her books are out of print, but she had been this pioneer, literally trying to find a patch of dirt where she's from, putting a grave marker on there, literally writing an essay about it. It changes the game. All of her books come back into interest. They come back into the print.
Wait, don't say her name yet. Don't say her name yet. I said, don't say her name yet. Go ahead and say that part. I wonder if other people know, if you guys are listening, and because I see tons of people that are listening. If you're listening, put in the chat, who is Professor Claiborne talking about? Go ahead.
So what I was going to say is I don't have to like the essay In Search of Our Mother's Garden to be just the process of going through that to sort of touch me. So with In Search of Our in Our Mother's Gardens, just having all these women finally saying what they've been through, what their life is like, whether you think they clean it up for the camera so it fits into this narrative or not. It is so powerful. And when you see Kokava, Dr. Coco, I'll call her because I don't know her that well personally, is that when you see her talking, you see that this is what it looks like for a woman to be free within herself. That you have a sense that she's telling her own story, and she's not trying to tell a story that is cleaned up about Black people or to make white people happy, that is going to, you know what I mean? Like, I just felt like it was wonderful. So that's mine.
I really loved it too. I am very much a womanist, and it's a huge part of my identity and my location and my ethics and my academic location as well. So I really loved it. I thought it was great. I will say I found it, it left me with lots to think about. Like, I had a very interesting conversation with a colleague where we were talking about how it struck us, Dr. Elise Ambrose, it struck us that a lot of the stories were getting told absent of men, it seemed. And that seemed really interesting to me, particularly for me, which is how we got into the conversation, because, you know, I have all of these stories and lineages that I trace of women because of my womanism and Black feminism. But my father is a huge part of my story. My grandfather is a huge part of my story. So I can't quite tell those stories without naming them. And I didn't experience that. So I thought that was really interesting. And it kind of made me think about, in ways that we center women and center women's stories, no, that doesn't necessitate the presence of anybody, of any person, of any experience. But it did cause me to wonder how our ability to center these narratives and to be able to construct, I saw it more as resistance versus outside of respectability, but I certainly see that lens too. But how do we construct these truths and be able to recognize the places where our own trauma is kind of informing what we can have pleasure in and how we want to tell those stories. So I thought it was great. I really thought it was great. And I think it's really beautiful also to see people be themselves, right? These people that we read, these people that we watch, and we don't get an opportunity always to know what the narrative itself is and what the narrative is that's driving that experience. So I really thought that was beautiful. And I think the other piece I want to throw in there that connects to Black trauma porn also is all of this has a spiritual efficacy. You know, there's a spiritual efficacy, there's an outcome in what we're doing. There's a reason why in ancient Africa, and we still have it in how we do life as Black folk, we had a Jali, we had a griot, we had a person whose responsibility it was to reflect back to the community what our stories are, because it gives us a lens, it gives us a mirror, but it also holds sacred space. It allows us to heal. It allows us to be able to make space for growth. It allows us to be able to experience both joy and pain in ways that shift us and transform us. And so I really think that spiritual efficacy is the thing that we have to even think about when we're talking about Black trauma porn and how we assess if this is a film or a short story or a narrative that we should take in. What's going to be the impact of watching this? So much like Dr. Claiborne said, for me, Lovecraft Country, I love, but the episode with the girls, I couldn't watch it.
I didn't watch that.
because for me, that episode was Black trauma porn, because it was spiritual trauma porn. And there's a way that taking in those images and the energy of them, and the intent of it was horror, you know. The intent of it was to terrify your spirit. And so I think we have to always remember that too, because we are not a separated people. We are integrated people, and all of these parts of ourselves are participating in how we engage these materials.
No, that's a good point. With that one, I wanted to be able to hear. So what I did is I listened to the podcast first, so I would know what to expect. And then I was working, and so I had it on. I listened to the audio, but I didn't actually watch it, because I always talked about, I didn't have the language for it as a child, but I always would say that that's kind of stuff disturbed my spirit. I didn't watch whatever. You remember all the horror movies that came out when I was little? I was the one that was always bullied and teased because I didn't want to watch stuff, because I would be the one that would be crying and going in the other room because I just couldn't do it. And at that young age, what my body was telling me was that you didn't need to be taking on this trauma. This trauma for you was not entertainment at all, in any way, shape, or form. As it relates to In Our Mother's Gardens, I was glad that I watched it at least one time. What I struggled with, let me say the good part. I just appreciated being able to see these Black women on screen, and some of them I knew, and knew of. I don't know them personally. And so that was good to be able to see. And I remember seeing Professor Mama Kokaba, which I called her, and I couldn't place her. I couldn't figure out her name. And her energy, like there was one point when she was talking about, if you want to emanate death, destruction, and something, then follow them folks, or something she said. And then I remembered, and I was like, oh, I remember she used to be a professor at Morris Brown. And so then I called Kenja, and I was like, where was that lady's name? And then she said Kokaba, and I was like, yes, we used to call her Mama Kokaba. And I just always loved her energy. So it was good to see her there. One of the things that I struggled with is, I think that there is this movement now, and I'm not necessarily against it, that is very, some people say, like in Brittany Cooper's book, Beyond Respectability, some people are anti-respectability politics. I'm all for that. I do not think that we should comport or transform ourselves or shift anything about my Blackness, my blackness for the comfort of Europeans. I'm not going to do it, and I'm not going to suggest that anybody else do it. Just not going to happen. At the same time, I recognize that I descend from a group of folks that thought that that was going to be the way that they were going to make it. And I'm not going to dishonor that. I'm not going to dishonor anything that my ancestors taught me, because it was useful information. And it has helped me, it transformed me into the woman that I am today. So there was a whole conversation, about Monique and her making the comment about the young sisters going with the bonnets and the slippers and the house stuff. So I didn't come from messy grandmamas. They didn't gossip and do all of that talking and stuff like that. That just wasn't the people that they were. But I do remember this one time, my grandmother and I were sitting in a car in Kmart in the parking lot, and she pointed this lady out who had them pink rollers that they used to have in her hair and some slippers and some house clothes on. And she said, you see that lady? Don't you ever walk out the house like that. That's all she said at one time. And I just remembered that being in my head, that when I walk out of the house, I needed to be a representation for myself, my family, and my ancestors. Okay. I don't think that I need to go and try to impose that onto other people or tell people that they need to shift their behavior. But at the same time, I don't need to dishonor the fact that my grandmama said that. And I also don't need to try to find ways to fit, or no, let me say this in a different way. I didn't necessarily see the stories of I knew both of my grandmothers. I knew all four of my grandparents, and I didn't see their stories reflected in what I saw on film, even though I knew that that was somebody else's story, because I wasn't raised by folks that would go into a store and break out windows. They didn't do that. They didn't pull out guns on folks and stuff like that. They did stand up for their rights, but they did it in a very different way. And so I don't want to just dismiss them because they wasn't in the store. Like, that just wasn't them. And I felt like it was only like the space for the grandmamas that were doing that. The only thing that may slightly have fit my grandmother is like one of my grandmothers did go to the dog track and bet on the dogs. So, you know,
but I didn't think that it had to. This is what I guess is what I was thinking that this did. And I know, for example, that Chantrell Lewis is going to have, she was talking about having a companion piece, a written piece, and doing a call for papers and asking other women to contribute, to think about ways that this can be an ongoing conversation. Is that what she was trying to do is invite you to tell your own story. Nobody's story should look, nobody's grandmother has 11 husbands except for Dr. Kokava. Like, I can't imagine. Somebody was like, well, that was me too. Like that, but it was like, look how, I think that what it did for me is like, we already think we know the Black grandmother. We think it is Medea because that's what Tyler Perry told us. That's what society tells us. But by women telling their different stories, and they were sort of regionally the same, but their stories were very different. Even if the people ended up getting to the same place, I thought the way that they did that was like extremely different, right? Some whose mothers had been addicted to drugs, some whose, parents had come as immigrants to the United States and they're always very proper. You're going to be a doctor. You're going to do this, da, 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 da. I thought that what it was saying is that, okay, I've told my forebear's story. Now it's time for you to tell yours. And
I didn't walk
it does
away
not
with
need
that.
to sound like ours.
I didn't walk away with that. I walked away with like, these are Black grandmamas. Like, in my mind, it was Black grandmamas that weren't married, but my grandparents.
Not at all. I don't know. Did you watch the same thing I watched? I feel like that was
not how I saw it. I didn't see Black men represented and Black men.
So they didn't talk about men.
I just didn't see it.
But I think that that's one of the things about when you focus on women. I think for some people it is uncomfortable because even somebody had asked me about Dr. Kokava. They're like, was she married? She can't be married. And I was like, well, what does that got to do with the story she's telling right now? Right? Like, so we get so stuck up.
Married, but what does that have to do with anything?
But this is what I'm saying, that they didn't know how to place her story because she did seem, because in their mind, I think what they were saying is like, it don't seem like no Black man will put up with her because she seems like she's too much of a character. This is my interpretation. It could have been wrong. But I don't then think, well, because Chantrell Lewis, as the director, didn't include her husband or her son or anybody else in the documentary, that means that she had, it's putting forth a narrative that these women, hate men or they don't. That's why they didn't talk about them. I didn't get the impression
that it was a hate of men. I was just saying, I just noticed that other than Mama Kokava talking about her grandmother having 11 husbands, right. I just didn't remember hearing them in relationship with anybody. And so that just stood out to me. And it stood out to me, or lots of them are academics that were there, and so it was from
probably
a very
half of them were academics, right?
I mean,
so
more than the average population,
which is a large percent. I think, so what I was saying earlier, it was I think more along the lines of what Ifetayo was saying, which is, I think it's interesting if in order to tell a story that centers women, we have to exclude other parts. That's the point that I'm raising, which is interesting to me because I honestly didn't notice until I was having all of these conversations about it. In the middle of it, I was just enthralled because this is what I love. This is all I want to do is talk about Black women. So but I'm saying in reflection of it for me, the point that I was making was about the ways that we tend to compartmentalize or exorcise pieces in order to feel like we can elevate and honor another piece. And I want to challenge us from both a spirit and academic place to say we don't have to move that way.
But I think it's about recovery. So, for example, if what we did in High on a Hog is that we said, well, we're going to have white people talk about their family histories and explain how the enslaved who cooked for them influenced their food. We would be horrified. We don't want to, that wasn't the purpose of High on Hog. Of course they can have, except for the one dude who's doing the rice in South Carolina. He talked about my mother grew up with these recipes, but it is not that we don't think those stories are important, but for this purpose of recovery, because we don't often hear stories about the enslaved themselves, the Africans and how they've impacted American cuisine. That's not a cooking show. They weren't showing you how to make stuff, right? They were just saying, these are the stories that go along with this food that you love. If you eat macaroni and cheese, it's because James Hemings, who was enslaved by Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson, is the one who made up that recipe. And let's talk about
that blew my mind, right? That totally blew my mind.
Well, I already knew that, but yeah. So it was like one of those kind of things. Mm-hmm. But it's like something. It's like, well, dang, I never thought about why Black people love macaroni and cheese so much, right? Like it could be that, but to then go have some white person who's like, well, we ate macaroni and cheese too, right? This is not the place, and it is the same thing. And this is what Alice Walker would say, that she goes in search of her mother's gardens because she don't know nothing about it. She hadn't been told anything about it. Even when she's at Spelman, she says that the idea about Black womanhood she's given is false. So partly what she does is try to go find what that other representative is. And that's Zora Neale Hurston, who doesn't follow rules, who's all this other kind of stuff, and is not this perfect church-going Black woman that she says Spelman, and in her book Meridian, she calls it Saxon College, but you still know it's Spelman, like they try to create her to be. So
yeah, I remember
that name we praise, standards and raise.
Yeah. Did you say what?
I said Spelman, thy name we praise, standards and
I know, but she dragged y'all. I was like, ooh, I just had my students read Meridian this semester, and I was like, it's the fictional Saxon College, but it's like literally she talked about the tree in the middle and going to chapel, and like how, if women got pregnant, they put them off campus. It was a mess, but yeah.
Yeah. What about A Love Song for Natasha? Did anybody watch that one?
I
think
I didn't watch that one.
The Project of Recovery. I think I would recommend it. I think it's what we're talking about in terms of well done media that visits the topic of Black trauma, but does not present it as Black trauma porn. It's definitely recovery. But again, it's, it seems as if there's a theme here, and the things that we think that we like tend to be documentaries where people, like the genre lends itself to a more nuanced discussion.
I was going to try to think about some film, like some just narrative film that I thought did a really, really good job of like some of this work of recovery and is not trying to take intense joy in people's suffering. And I can't think of any that are recent. So
okay, so maybe I'll give you a chance to think, and we're 15 minutes over, so we'll get ready to close out. The one I liked, I mean, it wasn't a wonderful film, but like a recent one is Sylvie's Love. It was just a Black love story.
I liked Sylvie's Love. I did.
And they acknowledged that racism was going on in the background, but it wasn't in the forefront. It wasn't like this, albatross around everybody's neck. It is what it is in that film. And so I just appreciated that it was just this random love story. It wasn't, Oscar-worthy material or anything, but it was just Black people figuring out their love in their own way. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, I didn't love it, but...
Yeah, I didn't love it.
That's what I'm saying. I'm just saying I think they did a good job.
I guess the guy to me was so problematic, and I don't know why. I'm like the only one who felt like that. I was like, oh yeah, nah.
I know, but I'm saying beyond that, just being able to watch it and you not have to be like, they're stopped by the cops, what's gonna happen next? And you're feeling anxiety, and you ready to get mad, or
I actually wish they were stopped by the cops because it would have shown that dude wasn't willing to make no sacrifices in order to be with her. That would have been like earlier on. I was like, that dude had to lie about having a job. I was like, what is this? Like, okay. But anyway.
Estee, Kenja, Corrie, what books? I mean, not necessarily books. I'm sorry, movies. You got a movie that was just enjoyable to you?
It's not a documentary, right? It's not a documentary. It's called Time. I don't know if you've seen it. It's about this woman who's she went to jail too for robbing, but her husband's in jail. But it's about waiting for the 20 years, trying to get him to get out. That was amazing to me. I don't know why. She filmed her life over these 20 years, and they sort of put it together in a documentary. But anyway, that's a documentary. I'll think of something else.
I'm gonna say what we've already been saying. High on the Hog. I really think every person that is a descendant of Africa needs to watch High on the Hog. When I saw them bring out the ring shouters, I was like, "Oh, we ain't here doing spirit work and eating." Like this is. I don't know that it gets any better. And I think it really does raise awareness. Like, I can't tell you how many folks I've seen have conversations about okra, whether they hate it, whether they like it, slime. But I've seen all of this conversation about thinking about food differently. And food is so central to us, how we function, how we commune, and integrating spirituality and the truths of the horror of the Ma'af and the transatlantic slave trade, but our resilience and our survival through and in the midst of that, and its evolution over time. I feel like it just hits all of those.
And I feel like they can have more episodes, like they can come back with
Oh my God. So Jamila and I were talking about that. I think they can go to Latin America, look at Afro-Latino culture. I mean, they can do different regions of the US, they can do Brazil, they can go to different parts of the continent of Africa. I mean, I was so excited. And the fact that the brother was talking about like food, cooking, the one from Philly talking about cooking being ancestral to him, I was all in love. I was totally in love with the whole
so that might say something because I hear a lot of people say, well, I want a real movie. I don't want no documentary, like in terms of what they want to watch. And I think that a lot of people, again, because I think that the narrative of Hollywood is very seductive, right? Like, and they just automatically assume, well, it's not going to entertain me. I'm not going to be able to escape. And I hear people say that a lot. I watch movies to escape. There's enough problems, and I don't want to watch a documentary that's going to highlight those. So I think that I hear a lot of resistance to watching even something like High on the Hog. You could tell people, no, it's really good. I know it's not about slavery, but it's one of those kind of things where they're like, well, I'd rather watch whatever Marvel's got going on, or I'd rather watch whatever else. So, but no.
Another one I would throw out there too. It's on Netflix. It's short. Also, it's called My Love.
Okay.
And it's narratives of love stories. It's documentary. It's a documentary, but it's narrative.
It's a documentary.
Oh yeah. But it's love stories from across the world. And it includes there's a beautiful story about two queer women in Brazil who as soon as they showed one picture, I was like, they're priests. What's going on here? So it was really, really beautiful to see them highlight and be invested in showing different experiences. And it's global. So that's a good one.
Yeah, you're gonna have to get back to me. I'm gonna have to think for a week because I literally can't think of a movie in the last 2 years, a narrative feature film that I was like, yeah, that was it.
Dr. McCray, what about you?
What was the one about the horses, the urban cowboys? I did like that.
Concrete Cowboys.
Concrete Cowboy. I like Concrete.
I would have thought that was so far-fetched. Except
it is not.
Atlanta. It's not.
Literally. I have pictures of me at some Black Greek weekend in Philadelphia riding a horse down the middle of the street.
Yeah.
Those people really exist and have horses in their row house, and they're like, whatever.
So what we
No, I said I really like that one too, but I mean, I brought mine in at the beginning, which is another documentary, a love song for Natasha. I would say you said that for the suggestions, I think we could probably pick up this conversation here or somewhere else with Monster. I would love to hear you all's take on Monster. I would not. I didn't like it, but it's a complex movie, and I'll definitely be up for a discussion about it. I also, as my last word, I'm sorry that Professor Waithe had to go because I had a question for her, and maybe she can answer it in the chat below the recording of her definition of revenge porn. I didn't know if she was turning revenge porn that concept on its head, because my understanding is that revenge porn is when somebody particularly uses the internet, social media or something, to put up like salacious pictures of you, pictures of a person in different states of undress, involved in sexual acts as an act of revenge. Say for instance, you broke up with me and I'm going to post us, pictures of us having sex, all over the internet or on Facebook or whatever, or of you having sex with me, right? And I'll cut myself out. That's revenge porn, but I thought she used it in a different way, and I just wanted to clarify that. So hopefully she'll be able to do that for us.
I'll tell her, and then hopefully she can answer it in the chat. Okay, so another good conversation. Thank you to my colleagues, Professor Corrie Claiborne, who's Associate Professor of Literature at Morehouse College, Estee Nena Dillard, who is the owner of Endless Spiritual Consulting. She's a queer sexologist, a Reverend, and a Olokun and Ifa priest, and Dr. Kenja McCray, who is a historian. My name is Dr. Ifetayo Ojelade. We hang out first Fridays of every month and have these conversations. So if you enjoy having these conversations, I see people are still watching me. So thank you for hanging out here today. Do me a favor. Oh, thank you, Marsha. She said it was brilliant, ladies. So thank you so much. Do me a favor, press that like button. Do me a favor and share this so your networks can also see it. If you are wondering when we show up, if you want to get the notification of when we show up, I am actually here every Friday talking about different things that have to do with African people's history, life, culture, and psychological well-being. And so all you have to do is click the notification button and you will get a little notification every single time that we go live. So take care.